Hi folks, this is a video on food webs and food chains. We've started off looking at food chains, which shows how energy moves through nature. They can be quite simple. The ones that we've been looking at are things like this. So deer eat the trees and then a lion eats the deer. If we make it more complex, all we're really doing is making it longer. So more stages in that chain. But in the real world, they can actually be quite complex, or really, really, really complex, or ridiculously complex. But really, the food chains that we've been looking at are just little sections of these very complex food webs. And they're a simpler way of looking at a small snapshot of the environment. And just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not true. It's just a easier way of looking at it. If we take a whole bunch of food chains, we can add them together and make a food web. So this last one here, you've got the flowers to the eaten by the flies, flies eaten by the frog, frog eaten by the snake, snake eaten by the eagle. We can see that in this food web. We've got the flowers on this tree down here. There's the fly, there's the frog, there's the snake, and there's the eagle. But there's different ways through this food web. The fly might not be eaten by a frog, it might be eaten by a small bird, and then that small bird is eaten by the eagle straight away. So food webs and food chains are related. Food webs are a bit more complicated, but they still show the same information. And although this is a biology topic, we can think about energy in terms of physics and energy stores. So there is a certain amount of energy, say, in the grasshopper, and then the frog gets that energy by eating the grasshopper and digesting it. The snake gets the energy from the frog by eating it and digesting it, and the eagle gets the energy from the snake by eating it and digesting it. A few people, when you did your food chains last time, showed arrows going the other way. So had an arrow, for instance, pointing from a rabbit to some carrots. We always, in food chains and food webs, we always show the arrows going from the thing being eaten to the thing doing the eating. So they're always going up the food chain, if you like. But where does this energy come from? This probably won't work, but if you find this video and look for The Circle of Life by the song from The Lion King, there is a line in it that talks about the sun rolling through the sapphire sky that keeps the circle of life going round. And that's technically correct. We looked a little bit at plants and plant cells and the chloroplasts inside plant cells. They perform something called photosynthesis, and that's how plants get their energy. So the energy that's in our food ultimately comes from the sun. Even the energy in animals. So if you eat chicken or beef, that energy came from the sun, because the energy in that chicken came from the plant matter, the plant food that it was eating. So really, all of our food chains and our food webs should start with the sun, but we often leave it out because it's always going to be the same. What we generally start our food chains with is some kind of producer. And that's a key word that you'll need to recognize the definition of. Producer is always a plant that uses the sun's light, so energy from the sun, to perform photosynthesis and make its own food. And that's chemical energy that ends up running through the entire food chain. So the energy from the sun is eventually gets into our bodies. Here is a fairly simple food web. From now, I'm gonna start asking you to pause this video as you go and have a go at answering some of these questions. So we won't do it for this one because it's quite a quick question, but what is the producer in this food web? Hopefully, after looking at the definition of what a producer is, you should be able to realize that the green plant is our producer in this food web. It's the only plant, and that's the one doing the photosynthesis. But all of these other creatures, these animals, we give them a special definition, special name as well. So only the organisms which do not do photosynthesis have to eat to get their energy, so we call them consumers. It's another key word. And they might be primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary, or even higher numbers depending on how far up the food chain they are. A primary consumer just means that it eats plants directly. A secondary consumer eats things that eat plants. A tertiary consumer eats things that eat plants. So it's just levels and levels and levels up. What level consumer do you reckon each animal is on this food web? So this is one of the times where you should pause it and have a go at saying whether you think it's a primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary consumer. Okay, hopefully you've had a go at that. The animals which are primary consumers are going to be our mouse and our goat, because those are the animals which are eating that green plant directly. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, hang on, the rabbit eats the green plant directly, but there's another arrow going to the rabbit from the mouse as well. So the rabbit is actually a primary and a secondary consumer, because sometimes it's eating the green plant directly, which makes it a primary consumer, and sometimes it's eating a mouse, which makes it a secondary consumer. So the rabbit is actually both. The owl and the snake, they're just secondary consumers. There's only one arrow going to the owl and one arrow going to the snake, and they're coming from the mouse, so they must just be secondary consumers. The wildcat and the jackal, they have two levels as well. They are secondary and tertiary consumers, because our rabbit, it can be a primary consumer. So if the wildcat eats the rabbit thinking of it as a primary consumer, then it's a secondary consumer. But if we say, okay, this mouse has eaten some green plants, then this mouse gets eaten by a rabbit. So there's primary, there's secondary. If we think about the wildcat, then the wildcat would be a tertiary consumer. The kite is just a tertiary consumer because there's only one arrow going to it, and it's coming from the snake, which is a 2. So it's a secondary. So we've got primary, secondary, tertiary. The lion occupies 3 different levels. So it could be a secondary consumer if it eats the goat directly, but it could also be tertiary or quaternary, depending on how we think about the jackal and the wildcat. Write 3 food chains using the food web. So this is a little bit like that first one where I was talking about the flower and the fly and the frog. So make 3 food chains and end them at a secondary consumer, a tertiary consumer, and a quaternary consumer. So this is another chance for you to pause the video, have a go at making those food webs, and then unpause and we'll go through the answer. So a food chain that I reckon I would go for that ends at a secondary consumer would be green plant, mouse, owl, because there's nothing after the owl, nothing eats the owl. Chain that ends in a tertiary consumer, green plant, mouse, snake, kite, because there's nothing that eats the kite. And something that ends in a quaternary consumer, green plant, mouse, rabbit, wildcat, lion, Or you could go green plant, mouse, rabbit, jackal, lion. Human poachers decide to hunt the kites for their feathers. What effect might this have on the whole food web if the poachers kill a lot of the kites? See if you can keep thinking about knock-on effects. You could probably think, well, okay, if there's lots of kites dying, what's that going to cause to happen to the snakes? But then think, well, what happens next after that? And what happens next after that? So pause again, have a go at that. Okay, hopefully you've given that a go. So if we kill lots of these kites, kites are the only things that are hunting these snakes. So we're going to end up with a lot more snakes. If we've got a lot more snakes, they're going to eat a lot more of these mice. If the number of mice starts going down, because they're all being eaten by snakes, there might not be enough food for this owl. So we might start seeing a decrease in owl numbers. The wildcats and the rabbits eat mice. Rabbits occasionally eat mice. The wildcats eating quite a few mice. So we might start to see the numbers of wildcats go down. If the numbers of rabbits have gone down, the number of jackals might go down as well. And if the number of jackals and wildcats go down, we might see the number of lions go down. So just by affecting this one part of the food web, there's this massive knock-on effect to all these other creatures. Okay, producer and consumer, probably new keywords for you, but these keywords down the left-hand side, you probably recognize them. I reckon you could probably have a go at writing your own definitions for what they mean. So pause it and have a go at what you think the definitions are for those words, and then unpause it and we will have a look at the proper definitions. Okay, so the proper definitions for these words: carnivore only eats other animals. That only part is important. Carnivores only eat other animals. Predators, they will hunt other animals. Omnivores can eat plants or animals. They might not eat both all the time, but they are able to survive on a diet of plants or animals, or a mixture of the two, for quite a long time. Humans are omnivores. We can survive on just eating plants. Some humans survive on just eating animals. They don't have any veg. But most humans will eat a bit of both. Herbivores only eat plants, and prey, those are the creatures that are hunted by other animals. The different levels, so producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, these are called trophic levels. Have a go at answering those two questions. If you think back to this diagram, so you've got a trophic level in producer, you've got a trophic level in primary consumer, you've got a trophic level in secondary consumer, and so on. Can you explain how an animal can occupy, so be in more than one trophic level? And then, can you think of a plant which also occupies more than one trophic level? So, for example, a plant which is also a consumer. Pause the video, have a go at those two questions. Okay, a plant which is also a consumer could be something like a Venus flytrap. So Venus flytraps will do photosynthesis. They will make some of their own food using light from the sun, but they will also trap small insects and use the nutrients from that insect to help them grow. Sometimes they capture even larger creatures. That is a small lizard being caught in that Venus flytrap. There's another type of plant called a pitcher plant. It's like a big jug, and it is in here full of a very slippery, sweet liquid. So creatures are attracted to it because they think, "Ooh, lovely, lovely sweet liquid, sugar water." But then they slip inside. And they will drown and end up being dissolved by this liquid to feed the plant. Sometimes most often it's insects, but here we've got another small lizard or amphibian. Sometimes it's pretty big creatures, like a big bird has fallen into this one. Right then, last task, go back to Show My Homework, have a look at the 2 textbook pages and answer the summary questions. Those are the summary questions for the second part of your lesson, and questions 3 and 4 make up the extension.